Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Paint Mind Studio. Today is all about watercolors, more specifically the watercolors from Winsor & Newton. I'm going to tell you all about the student grade Cotman line and the professional line, focusing on comparisons, what you can do with both student grade paints and professional paints so that you will be able to pick what's right for you in case you're in the market for new paints. We're going to be swatching some beautiful colors and doing lots of color mixing. If this is of interest to you, then keep on watching. Okay, first I'm going to talk about all the details of the paints and get all that info out of the way, starting with the Cotman student grade paints. Up at the top, you can see the big white palette as well as a smaller white palette. The larger one is the Cotman Half Pan Studio set consisting of 45 half pans featuring the complete range of 40 Cotman colors. Included in the set are 5 additional colors which are duplicates of the 5 most popular Cotman colors: alizarin crimson hue, ultramarine, yellow ochre, ivory black, and Chinese white. So you'll get 2 of each of those. The smaller white palette is the Cotman Sketchers Pocket Set that contains an assortment of 12 half-pan colors along with a very small travel brush. The Sketchers Pocket Set is one of the most popular sets among artists of all levels and is ideal for outdoor sketching. Cotman watercolors are most readily available in sets ranging anywhere from 6 colors all the way up to complete 40 colors. They are available in half pans as well as 8 milliliter and 21 milliliter tubes. According to the Winsor & Newton website, their Cotman watercolors are made of fine art pigments with a reduced pigment load compared to their professional watercolor range, making them very budget friendly while remaining uncompromising on quality. In addition, Cotman colors have been formulated to have a uniform consistency along with transparency, making them ideal for those who may be new to watercolors. The black metal palette in the video is the professional tube travel tin with 12 5 milliliter tubes. Winsor & Newton's professional line of watercolors offers 108 different colors and are available in pans as well as 5 milliliter, 14 milliliter, and 37 milliliter tubes. 79 of the colors are single pigment colors. 104 of the colors also have a permanence rating of AA, which stands for extreme permanence, and A, which stands for just permanence. 105 colors are classed as permanent for artists' use, meaning that 97% of the professional watercolors are rated with a AA and A permanence, ensuring that whatever you create with these paints today will remain the same for generations to come. There is also a light fastness rating of 1 and 2. 1 being excellent and 2 being very good. To be fair, the Cotman line also has the same permanence rating as well as the same light fastness rating for many of its offered colors. Also, wherever a light fastness rating has not been assigned, then you should go by the permanence rating. Each color in both the Cotman line and the professional line also has additional properties listed, such as opacity, staining, and granulation. Granulation is the effect you get when the pigment particles clump together rather than settle evenly, with little to no variation in color and texture. The professional range offers over 30 granular single pigment colors that are both light fast and permanent. Winsor & Newton has available for download on their website complete color charts for both their Cotman colors and their professional colors. Both charts identify pigment codes, permanence ratings, light fastness ratings, as well as which colors are staining, granulating, transparent, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, and opaque. For the purpose of this video, I focused only on the colors found in this particular professional set shown in the video, so just the 12 colors you will see here. Therefore, I have compared them to their Cotman equivalents only. I placed each color from both Cotman and professional right next to one another, like for like. Cotman on the left column and professional on the right column. Right away, you will be able to see as I do my swatches that there is very little color difference between Cotman and professional, in spite of the lesser pigment load found in Cotman. I will point out, however, that for the Cotman colors, I either had to pre-wet them first before I used them, or I had to load up my brush with a lot of water in order to activate the paints. Whereas with the professional colors, I could just wet the brush normally and grab the paint straight from the palette with less effort. This is due to the higher pigment load found in the professional colors. In spite of that, I was still able to match color for color almost identically. Also, Since I was comparing paint pans to paint tubes, which isn't very fair really, I decided to also swatch two of the Cotman colors that I happen to have in tube form to even out the playing field a bit. Those two colors being lemon yellow hue and permanent rose. I was surprised by the lemon yellow hue I have in pan form in my larger Cotman palette, as it was a tiny bit duller than its twin in the tube, in the professional Winsor lemon. The lemon yellow hue from the Cotman tube that I used for the third swatch was not even fresh out of the tube when I used it. It was already in dried cake form and in a half pan sitting in my smaller Pocket Sketchers box. But it ended up being even brighter than the first one I swatched. So the lemon yellow hue from the Cotman tube matches pretty much exactly the professional Winsor lemon, also from a tube. That is certainly wonderful to see in any kind of comparison between a student grade paint and a professional grade paint. I also encountered the same exact result when I swatched out the permanent rose from the Cotman tube. The pan version came out a bit duller than the professional one, and the Cotman one, which I actually grabbed fresh directly from the tube, came out looking just like the professional one, and I mean exactly like the professional one. Now I will talk about some differences that might be worth noting between the Cotman paints and professional paints. The cadmium red hue from Cotman seems to have more of an orange tone, and the cadmium-free red from the professional seems to have more of a red tone. When I did my color mixing with each one, however, I found the mixes to be pretty much the same, so the difference in tones doesn't seem to really affect anything in the end. The alizarin crimson hue from Cotman is a bit of a weaker color compared to the professional one. The Cotman one has a permanence rating of A, which means it's very good, whereas the professional alizarin crimson only has a permanence rating of B, which means it's only moderately durable. Furthermore, the Cotman one has a light fastness rating of 1, which means it's excellent, and the professional one doesn't even have any light fastness rating. Not that I could find anyway, so you would have to go with the permanence rating on that one. This difference, though, is something to consider for this color, I would say. Next up, burnt sienna from Cotman. I found that one to be slightly brighter than its professional counterpart, and for that reason, I actually prefer the Cotman one better. Interestingly, both paints have the same pigment code of PR101, which is pigment red number 101. Both are transparent, both have an excellent light fastness rating of 1, and both have a permanence rating of AA. So why the Cotman is brighter than the professional is beyond me, but there you have it. I should mention, though, that when I first opened my tube of professional burnt sienna and tried to squeeze some color out onto my palette, I found that the pigment had actually separated from the binder, and I had to remix the whole thing. It's a simple enough thing to do, by the way, so if you ever receive a paint tube in which the pigment has separated from the binder, don't panic. It doesn't necessarily mean that you received a bad tube. It just means that the tube was probably sitting around a little too long. What you can do to fix it is simply knead the tube with your fingers as much as you can. If that doesn't work, get a toothpick, stick it in the tube, and swirl around the contents until creamy paint starts to ooze out of the tube. That will be your cue that you've mixed it enough. This is actually what I ended up having to do. It happens. Anyway, I'm not sure if that's why my professional burnt sienna wasn't as bright as the Cotman one, but I thought I should mention it just in case. Also, because I had to reconstitute the paint, I had a bit of trouble getting the paint to behave for me at first. It's behaving now though, so just so you know. Lastly, Payne's Gray. If you've never seen the Payne's Gray from either the Cotman line or the professional line, then you're in for a surprise, because Payne's Gray from Cotman has more of a black tone, and the Payne's Gray from the professional line has more of a blue tone. This is better visible when the paints are both still wet, when you're first putting down the color onto paper. Once they're dry, however, that's when they start looking a tiny bit more similar, but the professional Payne's Gray still clearly has more blue undertones than the Cotman one. The professional Payne's Gray is semi-opaque and is made up of 3 different pigments: PB15, which is pigment blue number 15, PBK6, which is pigment black number 6, and PV19, which is pigment violet number 19. The Cotman one is transparent and also made up of 3 different pigments: PB15, the only pigment it has in common with the professional one, PB29, which is pigment blue number 29, and PBK7, which is pigment black number 7. So as you can see, the Payne's Gray from Cotman has absolutely no violet in it whatsoever, whereas the professional one does. And it is my own humble opinion that this difference in pigments makes the hue of the professional Payne's Gray superior to the Cotman Payne's Gray, since, based on everything I know about watercolors, Payne's Gray is supposed to have a bluish tint to it, which the Cotman version is missing simply because the two blue pigments that it does contain don't seem to be visible in the resulting color. And that could simply be due to the pigment ratio used to make the color in the first place. In a moment, there will be a close-up of the Payne's Gray swatches and you'll be able to see for yourself exactly what I'm talking about. After all that swatching, I took a minute to label everything. It's always good to keep track of what you're doing. And now for the color mixing portion of the video. Well, firstly, the small Skechers pocket set that you see in the video will sometimes come with either a cerulean blue or with a color called intense blue, which is really phthalo blue. When I received my little Skechers set, which I bought for myself about 3 years ago, it happened to come with intense blue, which I didn't mind at all because personally I consider intense blue to be two blues for the price of one. Basically, when used in a more saturated form, you get a rich, vibrant, and, as the name suggests, intense blue, which you were able to see for yourself when I swatched out that color earlier. But when you dilute the color by adding a lot of water, you end up getting a color that's extremely similar to cerulean blue, as you can see for yourselves in that very first large blue color swatch that I just did. Next, I created my own indigo by mixing Payne's Gray with ultramarine on the Cotman side and Payne's Gray with French ultramarine on the professional side. As I mentioned earlier, the Payne's Gray from Cotman is closer to black than the Payne's Gray on the professional side, which has more of that blue tone. So one color that I mix often by using Payne's Gray is indigo. So I wanted to see if the different tones found between the Cotman color and the professional color would result in any visible differences in either one of the indigo mixes. And it didn't really end up affecting either mix at all, which is great. Regardless of the obvious difference in tone, I was still able to mix an almost identical indigo with both the Cotman Payne's Gray and the professional Payne's Gray. So that was really good to see. The ultramarines might have had something to do with that as well, since both the Cotman ultramarine and the professional French ultramarine are pretty much identical, even though the French ultramarine is a highly granulating color, but still it worked really well. I then wanted to mix another color that I use often, and that's violet. Seeing as how both ultramarines are very similar, I wanted to mix that particular blue with permanent rose, which is a transparent color in both the Cotman line and the professional line. That transparency means that permanent rose isn't going to hide the granulating property of the French ultramarine. As a result, you can get a really interesting bit of color separation between the two once that violet mix is dry, which I think is really neat. It adds a nice texture to the color once it's completely dry. Using a granulating color for your mixes is a really good way to add texture and interest to your painting in a quick way and with less effort. I also mixed a kind of magenta using the same two colors of the ultramarines with their corresponding permanent roses, just in different ratios than what I used to mix the violets. So for violet, I used more of the ultramarines, and for the magentas, I used more of the permanent roses. But again, because the professional French ultramarine is a granulating color, the magenta also ends up creating some really interesting color variation in the form of a little bit of that color separation I mentioned, just like what happened with the violet. Again, only really visible once the paint is fully dry. Another color I use quite often is sepia, so once again I put the Payne's Grays to good use by mixing them with their corresponding burnt umbers. I was able to achieve that color pretty easily, with the only exception being, of course, that it took a little longer to mix the Cotman colors than it took to mix the professional colors. But honestly, it's not a big deal, at least I personally don't mind. Then I moved on to create more of a richer green, such as Hooker's green, by mixing Cotman's sap green with intense blue. Intense blue, or phthalo blue, is such a saturated color and it already has green undertones, so mixing a richer green with that color and sap green was pretty easy, and it was one of the few colors on the Cotman side that I was able to mix quicker than the rest. I mixed the same Hooker's type of green tone with the professional colors, and I noticed that the professional colors gave me a more saturated version of Hooker's green, which I'm sure was directly influenced by the Winsor blue green shade, so I ended up preferring that green mix better. I really wanted to mix a color that is one of my absolute favorites, and that is quinacridone gold. Yes, it is possible to mix your own quinacridone gold, even though it's such a specialized color. It doesn't even take that much effort. Basically, what you're going to want to use is the brightest yellow you have. In this case, my brightest yellow was lemon yellow hue on the Cotman side and Winsor lemon on the professional side. You take those colors and add their corresponding burnt umber in a very small quantity, you don't need much, and you'll get quinacridone gold. You can adjust the ratio as needed, of course, but it's completely doable. Always remember to label what colors you use for your mixes so that you have your formulas, one could say, available as a reference for future projects. Another color that I was able to mix quite easily and quickly with the color choices I had was turquoise, and that was all thanks to the intense blue on the Cotman side and the Winsor blue-green shade on the professional side. I mixed both with their corresponding sap greens, so sap green on the Cotman side and permanent sap green on the professional side. And that was all it took. I was able to get a nice, rich turquoise. Lastly, I ended up mixing a sort of Indian red or English red. The Winsor & Newton Cotman line actually already has that color, and it is indeed called Indian red. The professional line also has its own Indian red, as well as another very similar color called Venetian red, and that's more what I was mixing here since I really like the professional Venetian red. So yeah, I wanted to mix that by using cadmium red hue on the Cotman side and cadmium free red on the professional side. Earlier I mentioned that the cadmium red hue has more of an orange tone and the cadmium free red has more of a red tone, so I wanted to see if that difference would have an influence in the mixing, but as before, it did not. I mixed both with their corresponding burnt umber and ended up with exactly the same color. They were exactly the same looking at it in person. All right, and that brings us to the end of the color mixing. Here I'm bringing in the color swatches again, and I didn't even use all of them to make all of those mixes that I did. Since I mentioned this several times, I did some larger swatches of all the ultramarines so that you could see what I mean by granulation. At the bottom, you have the professional French ultramarine. At the top, you have the Cotman ultramarine. And on the right, we have the St. Petersburg White Knights ultramarine, which is a non-granulating color. So if you look at it closely, you can see more of an even tone in the White Knights ultramarine. And you can see how granulated the professional one is. And the Cotman one, even though it's not listed as a granulating ultramarine, it was very, very similar. It behaved almost identically. And here is a sample of something I sketched on location at my child's school. You can see that I used all of the Cotman colors in actually my smaller palette, my Sketchers Pocket set. That's the only thing I used to paint that. So you can see that even with just that limited color palette that you have in that small box, You can mix so many different colors with that. It really is ideal for on location sketching or on the go sketching. You can see how vibrant the colors are, how strong they all came out. And I was able to mix, like I showed earlier, a quinacridone gold, an indigo, a hooker's green, an English red, Venetian red, all of those beautiful rich colors. Something I recommend you do for watercolors that you already own or ones that you get in the future is to create a color mixing chart for all of your palettes so that you can better understand and see what your colors can do for you and what all of the colors are that you can mix with your palettes. You can place your dark tones on the upper right side and the lighter tones on the lower left. I haven't painted anything yet using only the professional set of watercolors since I only just recently purchased it, but as soon as I do, you'll probably see a video about it. If you're interested in seeing me use the Cotman colors some more, I do already have a time-lapse video up on my channel where I paint a beautiful green lighthouse using my larger Cotman set. I'll link it down in the description box. Alright guys, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you! I hope this was helpful and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!